Good morning, everybody, to the Legislative Issues Meeting. I'm Frank Hampton, 2015 Chairman of the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, and I would ask that you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting is hosted by the Chamber and sponsored by AT&T. I'd like to thank Rob Reynolds from AT&T, but I don't think he's made it here this morning yet, has he, Don? Okay. Well, thank you, AT&T. Now let me introduce the legislators. First, going from nearest to me to farthest away, we have Senator Tom Arpke from the 24th District.
Good morning.
Next, Representative J.R. Clays from the 69th District.
Good morning.
Representative Diana Dirks from the 71st District.
Good morning.
Representative Stephen Johnson from the 108th District. After the last meeting, I heard from a number of people that there was not enough time for questions. So we are making several changes today. The opening remarks will be limited to 5 to 8 minutes, and we would like questions submitted in written format similar to the candidate forums we host with the League of Women Voters. Please write down who you would like the question directed to, a specific legislator or all of them, and then I would also note that as the legislators get going on their opening remarks, you may want to go ahead and start writing out a question if you have one. If you just raise your hand with the question, someone will come by and pick it up, and we will try and get as many questions asked as possible. Thanks, and we will see how the new format goes today. And with that, why don't we begin the opening remarks, and we'll start with Tom Arpke.
Thank you very much. It's good to have a moderate-sized crowd today, I guess. But I do want to thank AT&T and the Chamber for hosting this. Probably the area that I'm most competent to speak on would be budget, since I do sit on the Ways and Means Committee. We've had a couple significant things happen in the last couple weeks. One, which you've probably read about in the paper, was substitute for Senate Bill 7, and that is our education block grant budget. You're probably wondering how that got passed. It's some political maneuvering, how these things happen. It's pretty typical. Both houses work on budget bills. The House has a position and the Senate has a position. Our budget bill was Senate Bill 273, and we were working on that in Ways and Means when the House passed their budget bill and then inserted that into what we call a shell. So they've removed the contents of that bill and they put the budget bill in Senate Bill 7. And since it was the entire contents and not a portion of each, it's a substitute bill. So that's why it's named Substitute for Senate Bill 7. Basically what this bill did was allow us to do block granting for K through 12 education. And let me tell you what this bill did. It's quite comprehensive in things that it's going to cover. One, the bill did repeal the existing finance formula and replaces it with this block grant. It's a 2-year block grant funding for fiscal years 16 and 17. So we've still got this year to finish through June 30th, and then we'll go to the block grant. The bill does have a sunset. It sunsets on June 30th of 2017. The bill would become effective on publication in the Kansas Register. KPERS was kind of an issue here. The way it came out from the governor, he wanted the schools to fund that through their budget. We removed that provision. We're going to fund KPERS through the state general funds. I'll get into the dollars here in just a second. The block grant does the following things. It's going to take the 14 and 15 as a base year. It's going to add $21 million or so for 15-16, and then for the 16-17 school year, it's going to add $20 million. For the KPERS portion in 15-16, it's going to add $79.8 million. These are for teachers that are currently working and on the retirement plan and building up their funds when they do retire. The 16-17 year is going to add $42 million. So the total block grant growth for those different things for 15-16 is $101.2 million, and in 16-17 it's a growth of $62.1 million. So the total funding for 14-15 is $3.4 million. For 15-16 it's going to be $3.5 billion, and for 16-17 it's going to be $3.57 billion. The other interesting area that we discussed and were a little concerned about was the governor had done some allocations. In other words, he had taken budget back, and for the K through 12 it was 1.5%. This bill restores those allocations, so there's no cut to the education budget for this fiscal year. So the schools will have the full funding that we gave them at the beginning of the year. The other areas that we still need to look at, of course, are a new finance formula. I think that's why we did this block grant. A lot of people say the current funding formula is fine, but we sure had an awful lot of lawsuits since we passed that, and it seems like it wasn't fine, since we still have the Supreme Court and the lower courts telling us we need to spend an additional $540 million. Part of the issue is the fair funding part of it. We have allocations for large school districts and small school districts, and that's probably a good thing. I think there are some school districts that choose to be small, and that's a concern, and let me give you why. If you look at the mill levy and the valuation of some counties, and I'll pick on Burlington since they're number one, the valuation of their county is $390 million. And they have 815 students. So if you look at the LOB valuation per pupil, it's $479,577 per pupil. And based on our 81.2% cutoff line, in other words, you look at the valuations and we move down that rank until we get to a county that's below that valuation. So we have about 48 to 52 counties every year that are above that 81.2% in terms of valuation. They receive no additional LOB funding. And if you get further down the list, we get to a couple school districts that are like 58, 62 down, Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission. And their county, or their school district valuation is $2.3 billion for one school district, that's Blue Valley. And Shawnee Mission has a $2.8 billion valuation. They both have about 20,000 students. Well, they receive LOB state aid, at $7 and $5 million. So here we have the two wealthiest school districts, literally, if you look at housing property values or average income, and they're receiving state aid. That's just not right. And so hopefully with a new funding formula, we can take out some of those disparities that are across the state. And we have to be very careful that we make sure that we are equitable in our solution to give each school district the ability to give our Kansas students an adequate education, because it's a partnership there. The parents are involved, the teachers are involved, and of course the students have to want to learn. So those are all just very dynamic things, and hopefully having discussion with the Department of Education, the school board, and our local boards will be able to come to a solution that lets us fund schools in the future that will let us have a little more flexibility and not be so rigid in the additional weightings that we've added that we really don't have a lot of control over. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll pass it on to JR here.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the Chamber, AT&T, our friends in the media who came here today, everyone who showed up, and of course, Access TV, who is recording this event for playing it later. I sit on the House Appropriations Committee, the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, and I chair the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee, which oversees the budgets for the Kansas Department of Transportation, the Kansas Highway Patrol, the KBI, and the Department of Corrections. I'm not going to go over the Class Act in as much detail because you just got much of it right there from Senator Arpke. But I did want to just mention in Appropriations Committee, when we put the bill together, I did have 2 amendments to the bill out of the 4 or 5 that were added. And one of them was to put back in the new facilities weighting for fiscal year 2017. That has an impact on Salina schools, especially since we do have some classrooms coming online that will receive some of those new facilities weighting dollars. This, of course, is only for, the block grant is only for a 2-year period, so there is a little bit of uncertainty about how that will be treated in the future, but as far as during the block grant period, we won't have any reduction in the new facilities weighting dollars that would come in to fund our kindergarten teachers. And then also an amendment that would restore the state aid for adults who are in virtual school programs, which would have an impact on the Adult Education Center in USD 305. So we were able to pass those 2 and get those added to the block grant bill to, at least during the 2-year period of the block grant, make Salina's schools a little more whole in that process. I'm going to go ahead and skip some of that stuff because Tom already covered it. As far as K-State Salina goes, in the past, K-State Salina has been lumped in with the K-State budget. There's actually a statute, KSA 76-205, which requires the K-State Salina budget to be a separate line item. So going forward, we're going to enforce that to allow for K-State Salina to be separated out. That's a positive for us. It gives Tom and I the opportunity as we go through the budget process to recognize the programs that are going on over at K-State Salina and reward them for all the success that they have over there. I started my college career at K-State Salina, and now I'll have the opportunity to defend it in the budget process separate from K-State's larger campus. In committee, we also stripped the funding for alcohol beverage control. There was a pretty serious overreach by the executive branch that was allowing sting operations in some small businesses that were previously told that what they were doing was completely legal. ABC then reinterpreted the exact same statute and decided it was illegal and went after these guys. So we got that taken care of, and there's now a bill that's headed over to the Senate to take care of those folks and get ABC off their back. We did restore that funding after that bill was put through. We also put an amendment in the budget. And by the way, the budget passed out of committee last week. We got an amendment passed that renovates Seton Hall on the Kansas State University campus. It uses about $60 million in bonding, and then the bonds are repaid through the Education Building Fund. That happens occasionally, kind of on a rotational basis almost, just by virtue of schools that needed projects pretty badly. That's the home of K-State's nationally recognized architecture programs. Also amended the budget to reflect a $33.8 million IT savings over a 3-year period, so we're going to be cutting some serious costs there when it comes to information technology at the state level, and got that passed. We have about $130 million in growth between the fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 16 budget. That's about 2% growth. So when you hear things like cut and cut, the budget grows and grows, so I'll just let you reconcile those two things on your own. In Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, we made some pretty historic reforms to the welfare programs in the state. We passed the HOPE Act with several amendments that I and another legislator proposed. We did a reduction in the lifetime temporary assistance benefit. It used to be 4 years, but now we're at 3 years with a 12-month hardship extension. So the 4 years remains, but it requires a different level to achieve that 4th year of benefits. We're going to put a photo and a name on the assistance program cards. In the past, that hasn't happened, trying to reduce some of the fraud there. We're also limiting cash withdrawals off the cards to limit some of the fraud and abuse of just simply taking the benefit card and liquidating it into cash to get around all the rules that restrict where you can use the cards, prohibiting things like tattoos, tanning salons, low priority purchases like that, and then also prevent out-of-state purchases on the cards so that people are using them in Kansas and are not taking them out of state. As far as some of the constituent service things we're doing, I'm not on the Fed and State Committee anymore, but we do have some bills that are introduced every year that attack K-State Salina's UAV program. That is a fledgling program, and it needs it needs defense. We have some folks who want to do some privacy regulations and restrictions on UAVs that could potentially be damaging to the program, so we'll continue to fight those off. It did not get a hearing this year, so hopefully that'll be the case next year. And then finally, I do have some meetings scheduled next week with KDOT and K-State Salina to discuss some projects involving the Airport Authority and some job growth here in Salina, so we'll work on that as well. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thanks again for being here.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to be back home. Thank you so much to the Chamber and to AT&T for allowing us to be here. And it's a pleasure to see that we have some members out here in our audience that are here and wanting to know what's going on in Topeka. Well, there are a lot of things going on in Topeka, and I'm going to keep this short. I sit on the Education Committee. We'll cover that shortly. The Veterans Committee and the Ag Committee. Agriculture Committee has been a lot of water conservation bills that we've been working and trying to make sure that we have adequate water. And they've been very complicated, so I won't try to go into any detail with that. And Veterans Committee, we just passed a bill that would, and then we put it into a Senate shell to be considered. A lot of times our military are coming home and they're being combat veterans now, you know, Iraq, wherever they happen to have been deployed, and they're having some issues, some mental issues. And a lot of times, you know, in the criminal courts, what we're trying to do is make it so that if it's something that could really harm them and their families, that we have some coverage there with a veterans type atmosphere, so that maybe they need to have some counseling, some mental health services, so that this wasn't something that they would normally do, but with the stress factor, post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, sometimes you have some issues with our veterans, and with them having served our country, I think that we should give them a little slack and maybe find some services for them. So that was an initiative that we just got put together yesterday. The block grant, I'll be real honest with you, I voted against the block grant. Simply because it was put together too fast, too quickly, and it was kind of remembrance of 2012 tax bill that was just kind of shoved out there, and you can see what's happened with that result. USD 305, I kept in constant contact with superintendents here and then also Southeast Saline, trying to visit with them and see what kind of an impact it would have on it. And by their counsel, I really felt that it was not going to be very helpful to our local school districts. And I'm sure that some of my colleagues on the floor felt the same way, but we just simply did not have the votes. It was a very close vote, and I was very disappointed that it did pass. Give you an example, Center High School, where Heinz was the first graduate. This is a rural high school, and all our kids graduated from there. Now I have grandkids going there, are going to lose $900,000. That's a lot of money for a rural school. And I just felt that with nothing to replace the formula, it was just put together too fast. That was my personal opinion. Not only my personal opinion, but my emails I couldn't answer them fast enough, asking me not to vote for it. Now, in education, that's a whole different perspective, and I'm only going to take 2 minutes here because I wanted to keep it short. Education committees this week, there was a bill that would take away in-state tuition for those children who have lived and gone through the system here, public schools. That in-state tuition was being taken away from them. And I passed an amendment. We had an amendment on the floor, and I drew the question that we table that, so that bill has been tabled for this year. It was just too fast, too soon. Yesterday, we had Common Core. We had a huge crowd, lots of, I heard some comments as I walked by, probably not really nice ones, but that's the way it goes. And we were able to kill that bill on the floor. There, you know, for those individuals who do not fully understand exactly the impact of that, you know, I'll be happy to answer questions. But for now, I want to pass it to my colleague, Representative Johnson, so he has an opportunity to visit with you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you to our sponsors. I received the same feedback that Don did, so I will keep it short and not bore you with what I've been working on. Block grant was a big deal. I did happen to vote no. I'm concerned about the risks. It is risky to leave it. However, there's also an opportunity. As I've thought about it since, there are things I didn't like about the formula. While I am worried that when we go back and there are issues with schools that need to be addressed, I'll have an issue in Ellsworth where we graduate 30 and we anticipate a class of 80 coming in. That'll be one of the things we have to address with an amendment, and I think it can be challenging as we have a lot of amendments to deal with each of the issues in schools across the state. However, I don't know that the current formula is perfect or what I would design. It's what I know, so I have some comfort with that. But I'm very interested in who will be involved in the process of writing the new formula. And I think if we can get all of the voices at the table, we actually could come to a better reality. So guiding that process of who, I think, will be critical in the coming weeks. I would hope that it is not driven by the ideology that can come from either party, but truly strives to focus on what our mission in education is, and then drives what we necessarily need to support that around it in a full formula. But that's a big job, and the reality is it did pass, so that's now what we work with. And if we can get out of the monologues of our ideology to a dialogue, I think it's actually possible to imagine something better, and look forward to having the possibility of joining people in that discussion and thought process. Budget, Representative Clays mentioned in passing that they passed a budget last week. That is huge. I have never seen a budget passed in March. To have time to react to it and think about it, I actually have to commend the committee for coming to a point that we have something to start scratching through now. That was not an easy process. I anticipate that I will support their work. I'm concerned about the level of funding for CAPERS, as you might imagine, but I really appreciate that there's something to work with. Concerned about the level of bonding. As you know, I support bonding for refinancing our debt. I support bonding for each of the individual projects that are there, but I want to look at our total bonded indebtedness and what that might mean for debt service as we move forward for 10 years. That debt service will continue to be there, and there will be other needs that we have. We have projects that we do need to bond in CAPERS and transportation. The Seton Hall project, absolutely, something that needs to be addressed. I want to be careful as I rely on bonding to fund my transportation projects. Am I in a building or a maintenance mode? I think that I will have roads to build, hopefully forever. And I don't necessarily know that I want to focus on just building, but am I maintaining, and if I am maintaining, what level of debt service is appropriate over time? The great news is now is a great time to utilize debt. So for the extent that it makes sense, great. We have to watch the overall level that we use. Tax, huge deal. We're going to need your help on tax. If you want to see major changes in tax, we will have to hear from you. We have heard a myriad of bills on tax, and we have picked on virtually everyone. If you haven't been picked on, your turn is coming. But whether it's wind, ethanol, farmers, cigarettes, alcohol, and the list goes on, looking at how that tax burden may shift to fund those things that are necessary. There also are broad-based bills on sales and income tax. If there is a desire to see a major change in income tax, I will tell you that I don't think the votes are there in Topeka to drive that. If the sense is there among our contractors, among our hospitals, among our schools, all across those areas, among the ag sector, where I hear I'd rather pay income than property tax. Those voices will have to unite to say, here's what we see is what we want to be able to pay for the services that we demand. Finally, working after retirement, our state employees and our teachers are perhaps, I haven't calculated it, but I'm going to say they're our biggest asset. So it's very important that we get policies that treat that asset correctly. One challenge we have is working after retirement. There is a significant bill that we did move out of committee yesterday, but I will not bore you with that. If you have questions, I'll be glad to address it, and thanks for your time.
Well, thank you very much, legislators, for your opening remarks. We do have a number of questions. Appreciate those people with very nice handwriting. We will try and get through as many of these as we can. We do have a lot, but why don't we get going on it? The first one I have here is addressed to all the legislators. What is your position on the open carry bill?
I may be the least qualified to talk about it, so I'll start and it'll go up from here. I think the open carry bill will, I believe it already has passed the Senate, am I right on that? And likely will pass the House soon. And it allows open carry without a permit. Concealed carry without a permit, excuse me. So that's the big change. Currently, you can open carry, and that's one of the arguments is if I happen to carry a gun and I put on a code, I went from open to concealed, and I could carry it before and now I can't. What's the difference? Some resistance to the list and the registration process that is there. I don't know that there's huge resistance to the training. Some of the training requirements probably aren't necessary. I think one of the arguments to say we'd like folks who carry to know how to appropriately handle the gun, particularly in a case if I happen to be pulled over by a police officer, should perhaps need to know how I inform them and how I move to best address that situation. I think there's some valid concerns to that. Nonetheless, I expect that it will pass fairly widely, and I doubt that I will join the opposition to try to stop it. So.
Well, there's one in every crowd. I would oppose this simply because we have concealed carry, and there's a reason that we have training, especially, for the handling of a gun. And I think part of this comes from personal experience. I was visiting with one of the audience here earlier. When we were dairy farming, we had a neighbor and who had a couple of boys, and our boys would go over there and they would all play together. And there was a family in town that was having some financial issues, and all of us in the community tried to help take care of them. And their little boy was over playing where our little boys played. And one of the little boys, the parents had a gun in the house, and it discharged and killed one of the kids while they were playing. Our kids were not there at the time, and I was so grateful. But the little boy that accidentally shot this little boy and killed him had to live with this now for the rest of his life. If he had known where a safety is and that the safety was on, perhaps that may not have happened. So I look at it that, yes, we know you can have a concealed carry, but there's a reason for training, and I don't think anybody who wants to be a responsible gun owner would really say that that's taking away his rights simply because he has to go for a week or however long it is and get the proper training. So on that particular bill, I would be voting no.
The bill in question is SB 45. It has passed the Senate. It has gone to the House Federal and State Affairs Committee, where it did pass out of there as well. So the next step is the House floor for SB 45. It is concealed carry without a permit is essentially what it is, and as was mentioned earlier, open carry without a permit is currently legal, so the difference really is whether someone can see the weapon or not on you. So my position on it is that I'm going to vote in favor of it. I think it's a reasonable distinction between someone concealing a weapon and someone not concealing a weapon. However, I don't think there's a difference in the amount of training those individuals have or should be required. So at this stage, I'm in favor of that bill.
I've been involved in hunter safety almost my entire life. I am a certified shotgun instructor. I do think training is a critical part of handling any firearm, whether it be a pistol or an AR-15 or a shotgun. I think top-of-mind awareness is safety is critical. All my children have been through hunter safety classes, and I took that class with them and took the test when they took the test. I think that's important that you show that involvement. So I think we have some kind of statute that says if you're going to buy ammunition, you have to have a hunter safety card. I know that's true in Colorado. It's not? Okay, I could be wrong on that, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you do need to show that you know how to handle your weapon and the ammunition you're going to put in it, especially the correct ammunition. So I did vote for Senate Bill 45. I think it's just an extension of our open carry that we have, and it provides the ability for our citizens to have that right. They have to realize that if you do not have a concealed carry card, that does not apply in either other state. That is not a reciprocal right at this point in time. If you do have a concealed carry, you've taken the class, you've paid the fees and have your permit, there are a number of reciprocal states that we participate with. I think it's up to 40-something, and you're able to conceal carry in those states also if you have your permit on your person.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. This is again addressed to all of you. Why don't we start with Tom, because it's on a Senate bill, Senate SB 56. What is the status of SB 56, and what is your position on that bill? And Tom, you might explain what that is, or someone.
Got it.
Folks, I'll tell you, if you give me a Senate bill number, I have no idea. Give me a subject, because we change the contents of bills often. And
Anybody?
That
SB
happens.
56, anybody know what that is?
I do, but you want a question short. This one happens to be on prosecution of teachers for distributing material.
We have it. We have it. You don't have to.
Okay.
What's the status of that bill and what's your position?
Well, my position is that we do not want pornography in classrooms, and I think we've allowed enough leeway for materials that are have artistic value of the subject matter. You're training a doctor or physician. Those things are already allowed. We're not going to prosecute a teacher for doing their job. So I think you've made a big to-do about nothing. We have just inserted literally 8 words into that bill to make it clear of what we want not to happen in the classroom.
Sometimes 8 words is...
Hold on. Come on. We're
I've
listening to
answered the question.
legislators here.
Thank you.
It is difficult to have a position on every House bill that's introduced. There are over 700 of them, let alone a Senate bill that isn't in our chamber yet. It looks like it was referred to Judiciary Committee on the 26th of February, and it hasn't been touched since. So I'm just going to pass on this since I don't know enough about it. And well, we'll just let Tom's
Does
commentary
anybody else
stand.
want to address this?
I'll jump in. Thank you. I don't know the words of it. I got a concept from the ability to prosecute a teacher for inappropriate materials or whatever. And I think we probably had some problem cases that drove the desire to try and change that. My position is I think our school boards will act swiftly to react to those situations and help figure out where we are. I have some concern about how we might open that up and what judgment there would be about what's appropriate or not appropriate from the level of prosecution and what risk that would place many great teachers at potentially. And dealing with lawsuits around that, I'm not overly fond of the amount of time that we can spend in litigating various issues. And if I'm talking about the right bill, which I think I am, I would like to leave that in what I believe is the very capable hands of our school boards to address issues that may arise, but I won't be supporting the bill.
This really came about by a teacher accidentally leaving a poster on a wall, which may have very well been an adult education class. And it just went viral that all of a sudden our teachers are teaching our kids pornography. The state school board is there for a reason, and I brought that very subject up in my debate yesterday when we were in education committee on the particular bill we were working at. It seems to me that they continuously try to take the responsibility away from the state school board, who in fact is there for that very reason. So, I'm a firm believer in local control. I'm a firm believer in leaving things in the hands of the experts and the professionals that are there for that reason, and I will not be voting affirmatively on this bill. It will be a no vote.
Okay, thank you, legislators. Next question is directed to J.R. Clays. Have any changes been discussed about grandparents' rights since 2011, as more and more grandparents are raising their grandchildren and/or helping with their care without help from free or reduced lunches, medical care, court costs, listening to grandparents' huge concerns when in care of parents, and the many other concerns we have? So any changes been discussed about grandparents' rights?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There is some work that's being done on that issue. I know that we have some folks who are both constituents of mine and also constituents of Diana's who have some concerns about this. There were some changes, as was noted back in 2011. I believe Representative Rubin worked on that bill. So we're working with him, and then also we have a couple of family law attorneys who are legislators, so we've begun having some discussions with them how we can give better direction to the courts. I think the courts have some good direction now, but need a little more clarification in the steps that they need to take to assist some of the grandparents who are essentially keeping these kids out of foster care, which I think is just an amazing thing, and what a great sacrifice for family members that these folks are making. But I know that Diana has also been helping out with this and has talked to some of the revisers on that end while I've been discussing it on the family law angle. She has been working in the revisor's office, so I'm also going to pass this question off to her if that's okay,
Yeah.
so that she can also give some comments on that.
I have a whole stack of information that I picked up from the revisor's office. Unfortunately, it's on my desk in Topeka. I'm going to be sending that to a particular individual in our community that asked me that question. Like anything else, it does take time to get, when a question's raised to one of our representatives in Senate, it does take time, and I hope that all of you realize, that we can't just give you an instantaneous answer. But the revisers gave me what the past legislation, what the current legislation is, and what has been done thus far. And I know there are a lot of families out there who face this, and bless them for stepping forward and helping out in a crisis situation, oftentimes with their kids, and the little guys, the grandkids should not have to suffer from that, and I think it's a great thought that they're so willing, to keep them out of that foster care confinement. But grandparents do have rights. I have 10 grandkids, so I would certainly want to be able to have that as well.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Senator Arpke. Legislation was introduced this session to prohibit the use of any public employer's resources in collecting union dues from the wages of public employees. This is a continuance of efforts in previous years to prevent the resources of public entities from going to support public employee union activities. The bill, SB 212, short title, Strengthening Protection of Public Employee Paychecks, was heard last week in the Senate Commerce Committee. The committee met yesterday to work the bill, and an amendment was offered that would broaden the scope of the legislation to prohibit all voluntary contributions for public employees from payroll deduction. The amendment passed and greatly broadens the scope of the legislation. It has the potential to impact items as charitable giving. The other part's not typewritten, so I'm not sure. What was the reasoning behind the amendment?
Unfortunately, I do not sit on a Commerce Committee. I did not hear the testimony. I'm not familiar with the bill at all. It's not come before the body of the Senate, so I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry. It's not in my area.
All right. The next question is to any of you, or all of you. With the proposed lifting of restrictions on gun purchasing, the prevalence of untreated mental health in Kansas, and the rise of terrorism everywhere, how do you propose to protect government offices, let alone ordinary citizens, from gun violence? Anybody?
Again, I'm maybe the least prepared to handle. All of those are challenging to keep in balance. The one thing that certainly the rise of terrorist activity and the increase of mental health challenges are there. What I'm relatively certain of is all of my efforts to restrict or control weapons in that realm are probably ineffective. I'd like to say I could, but I don't know that I can. Now, that aside, it still is something to try and say, how do we try and keep a handle on that? Just as we've seen in the mental health cases, it is times that they get a parent's or someone else's weapon that they are able to use. And with the brief amount of time that I spend with the Ellsworth Correctional Facility that's in my district, it astounds me at the creativity that humankind can have in destruction. And the things that can be turned into a weapon are things that I cannot imagine. And not to say that relaxing gun laws can't enable and make it easier, but I fear we may have bigger challenges to try to address both of those, and I don't know that we change it tremendously with incremental changes in the regulation. So kind of a weak answer to that particularly, but I'll look forward to catching folks afterwards to help find some of the direct correlations that we can do and perhaps change that could decrease that, because that would be great.
Okay. I always make a promise to myself to try not to be sarcastic at these events because it's just my personality, but I think that we need more signs. I think that criminals absolutely obey signs, and that if we just put more signs up, that we're somehow going to reduce the amount of gun violence that's out there, and that's just absolutely false. So I think that we do need to have an investment in mental health and mental health issues, but I think that the way that we go about it currently is not enough. I don't know of any lifting of restrictions on gun purchases in Kansas, as was stated in the question. That hasn't come before us. But if that were to come before us, I think it would take a lot of soul searching to be in favor of something like that when mental health issues are involved. I do know that we're working on a couple of things for the city of Salina, and one of them is to create a distinction inside a building. We currently, it's a all or nothing when it comes to allowing for concealed carry inside our public buildings. So something like the city-county building where you have the courthouse on the 3rd floor, we would not be able to say you're going through a metal detector on that floor and we're going to secure that floor. However, the rest of the building, you could have concealed carry in the rest of the building. And I know that's something that the county commissioners wanted to do, but it turns out that the statute didn't allow for that, even though we were told when we voted for it, it did. So now we need to make a little edit there so that we can allow for that so long as the courthouse remains in the city-county building. So I would just end on, I do believe that we do need to have a serious discussion about mental health issues and how that impacts gun violence, but I think that the current way that we go about it and the restrictiveness of keeping individuals from having concealed carry in public buildings is probably not going to do much to reduce that kind of violence.
It's a very delicate balance between open access to politicians or other public servants and having the ability to screen people that come in. And one area we did discuss this year with the Attorney General's office, I do review his budget. He was asking for some equipment to have the ability to screen people that come into the building. And of course, they handle very cases that are concern dangerous people, drug cases, theft. So he has asked for the first floor, which has the Secretary of State's main office where you can come in and register your business as an LLC or some other corporation. That really needs to be open. But the second floor, which is the administrative area, which has also the Secretary of State himself's office and the Attorney General and then all the attorneys, really needs to probably have some kind of review of the people that come into their office. Because there's just two secretaries sitting in the front and they'll buzz back and the attorney you want to talk to will come forward. So how do we get that balance between open access for people that are needing to do filings and get information and yet providing protection for our attorneys that, like I say, handle extremely difficult cases? And so we're still looking at the building plan. It's a historic building. It's on the register. It's our old historical museum. So we don't want to damage the marble that's in there. And we have to be very careful about the facade and all those things. So it's a difficult thing because as you want to take care of that building, it becomes incrementally more expensive to put in those types of systems. So yes, I do think we need some type of protection for our servants, our judges, our attorneys, those types of things, but we still need to have open access to the public.
I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I'd like to just make a comment. When I enter the State House and I see the security guards checking everything and people having to take the keys out of the pockets, sometimes their shoes, you know, I know it's, I know you feel that, why do I have to go through this? But I tell you, when I walk past that, it gives me a little sense of security. And last week or a couple of weeks ago, all of the legislative body had their picture taken out on the steps, and a legislator made a comment. He says, "Boy," he says, "somebody could drive by and wipe out government." You know, and that's a scary. I mean, it was just a sarcastic remark, and he was laughing, but it was. Last year, we had a fire alarm go off at the State House, and that's why I offered a bill to make sure that everybody knows where they're supposed to go during that, because we were right in the middle of a committee and nobody knew what to do. They hadn't instructed us, where do we go? So everybody was exiting the building. We're all standing outside, the governor and his staff, the lieutenant governor, I mean the whole government of Kansas. And if we would have had somebody who had a mental illness, and it's right out in the open, they could have just done a circle around the State House and taken care of all of us. And that was nerve-wracking for me, and I thought, you know, you really have to think about things like that. So when it comes to security, I'm first and foremost, I think it's really important that we have some type of security. It makes, if nothing else, it's a feel-good thing. But yes, and I think we need to keep track and make sure that those people who have an issue, you know, receive the proper treatment, and we'll take care of it. Thank you.
Okay, the next question we have here is addressed to Senator Tom Arpke. How many business entities in Kansas do not pay income taxes now, and any ideas on lost tax revenue?
Well, one, I'm not the Department of Revenue, so I don't know what the losses in taxes would be. I can tell you what our costs are based on the budgets that we do pass. There is a significant shortfall. I will tell you this, that our business registrations are up, and that's significant. I think we've had more business registrations in the last few years than we've had in the last decade. And I was talking to a friend of mine this morning about a business that I had started when I was up in Nebraska, and it took me 5 years to take the first penny out, because I was investing in infrastructure, inventory, employees, payroll, and I think it's a long-term commitment to our businesses that we allow them to build up that ability to make a profit. So I think when the governor changed the tax policy, we made a very long-term commitment to growing Kansas. And some of the people I've talked to, it's going to take to 2018 to 2020 to see really some of these benefits of the 15,000 or so new business registrations we've had for the last couple years. And I agree with that. It does take time. However, we do have a shortfall. I offered an amendment to our budget yesterday in committee. It was to keep our taxes a little bit more in control, and the amendment was to flatten everybody's budget. So whatever dollars they got for 15, they get that same amount for 16 and the same amount for 17. For 16, that was a $98 million savings. For 17, it was $109 million. Basically, with what we've passed this year, we need about $150 million extra dollars or so to cover our shortfall, ended up with a positive balance. So there's all these things that you can do. So in terms of changing tax policy, I think I agree with Representative Johnson. I don't think there's any talk about changing the tax structure this year, but we will be looking at many tax policies. I know that our tax chairman probably has 50 or 60 different changes to tax policy. One of those areas might be a sales tax exemption. We offer about $4 to $6 billion of sales tax exemptions in our state. And if you add in the property taxes and other kinds of exemptions, it's $10 to $12 billion of exemptions. So, like I say, it's probably going to affect you in some part if we change some of those statutes. Personally, I feel that anytime you get an exemption, it should sunset in 5 years, and we should review it to see what benefit the state has gotten, our people that live here, from that tax exemption. Is it worthwhile to continue that over a long period of time? Unfortunately, Kansas has never done that. We've got exemptions that have been on the books for 40, 50 years. I think it's time to review those things. And you're right, if you're going to take a hit for a little, you might as well take a hit for a lot, because you're going to get the same amount of complaints. So it's a policy area that we really need to take a look at.
And if I can weigh in just a bit, I am on the tax committee, and we did look at that directly, and I wish I could remember all the information for you. I believe the amount of revenue that changed in total approached $200 million, high 170 plus, maybe even a little over 200 million. That was the magnitude. I don't remember the number of entities in total. And then specifically, we have looked at eliminating the pass-through in terms of what might be considered passive income, and the amount that's attributed to that part is approaching 70 million. So some likelihood that that change in the tax might pass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question will be addressed, it's addressed to all of you. Very simply, do you favor the repeal of the death penalty? The questioner notes that Kansas needs funds and the death penalty is more expensive than life without parole. Anyone?
I'll tackle this one. My thought on the death penalty, I have been receiving several calls and emails in regards, to do away with the death penalty. I don't care for people who commit heinous crimes. I mean, I feel that they need to be incarcerated. But how often has there been a situation after this person has been executed that's found that they were not guilty? I think we need to look at that aspect of it. And I had a gentleman visit me at the State House. His daughter had been murdered, but he came to me and said, please, he says, do away with the death penalty. He says, she would not have wanted one life for another, and if it had been the wrong person, what would that mean to that family who lost a loved one erroneously? So why take that chance? If they're in prison, they are not living like we do. They are incarcerated. They have no benefits. They don't have any other than watching TV once in a while. But I don't think that we should take one life for another.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, an important issue, and the folks who have supported the repeal make a very good case, and the cost is a good case for considering repeal of that, and I have felt that that was the direction I was leaning. The counter side to it, when you see the heinous crimes that previous representative addressed, whether it's the Tsarnaev brothers in Boston, it's a little harder to hold that position, but my lean has been that I would vote to support the repeal.
With respect and deference to my colleagues, I disagree, and I don't think we have to look very far for an example of a use of the death penalty that would have saved many people a lot of heartache in the death of Officer Ivy. I grew up playing in Jerry Ivy Park and understand all too well that story, and my Cub Scout troop leader was Joe Hay, who called in the officer down that day. And it should be very personal to so many of us who, I was born afterwards, but so many of you who lived through that. Roy Schultz, who killed Officer Ivy, was given life in prison, and he escaped. And after he escaped, he did some horrible things that I won't repeat here because, frankly, they're not fit for a public audience. And he did them to a 5-year-old little girl. And I think that we oftentimes simplify these things with statistics, and they are really personal. And I would absolutely not vote to repeal the death penalty in the state of Kansas. I think Roy Schultz should have been put to death, and his actions after he escaped from Lansing only solidify that in my mind. And I think to honor the people who are a part of our community who survived, honestly just survived that event, I would vehemently oppose the repeal of the death penalty in Kansas.
It's interesting how we pass laws. If you want less of something, you tax it, in my mind. If you want to encourage something, you don't tax it. I think the death penalty is out there to prevent people from creating situations where they perform heinous acts. And if we didn't have that inhibition in that statute, it would probably allow them to think differently. I want them to be afraid of that particular act would create a situation where they would be facing a death penalty. I don't think we've put anyone to death in Kansas since I've lived here, which is almost 25 years. I think we've already set the precedent that we don't enforce the death penalty here, as opposed to Texas or Utah, where they do perform the death penalty. And I do think it has an effect on their crimes that happen in their state. So I will not be supporting the repeal of the death penalty.
Okay, the next question is directed to Representative Clays. How will K-State Salina be able to get a better budget as a small standalone within the full university?
Oh yeah, this is an easy one. As a standalone entity, it's a lot easier to recognize what people are doing right. And while K-State as a larger campus may come under great scrutiny for its prioritization, it is absolutely easier to take a look at a smaller budget, especially when I have the opportunity to sit on the Appropriations Committee and begin to reward the things that we're doing right at K-State Salina. When it's part of a larger budget, there's always the opportunity for the larger campus to simply determine what dollars go where, and I think we would be better served by a process where we're able to determine that this is a worthwhile well, I mean, all the programs at K-State Salina are great. I mean, we have the #1 flight team in the nation. We've got a top 3 UAV program in the country, if not the best. We have so many things, applied engineering that's going on there that's just amazing. I'd like the opportunity to be able to reward the campus for the good things that are happening there and start putting the dollars where they're most effective. So I think as a standalone entity, it's going to be a lot better off in the budget process than being lumped in with K-State, the larger entity in the Manhattan campus. And frankly, it was supposed to be that way from the beginning. The statute states quite clearly that that's how it's supposed to be, and that's how it will be treated going forward. So that is just the reality of it. We do follow the law. When we're aware of it, I suppose, up there. But for 15 years, what happened is under the Graves budget, it was when the budget comes in, it comes in from the governor, and then we have the governor's recommendations, and then we have the agency's recommendations, and then we have what comes out of our committees as our recommendations, and that's what we eventually pass. So what happened is Governor Graves in 1998 put in his budget recommendation, let's lump all this stuff together. And so when the committees passed each of the governor's recommendations by simply saying, we agree with the governor's recommendation, it lumped them together. Well, from that point forward, the governor's office just kept lumping them together and requesting those budgets together. So no one really referenced back to statute. There was an attempt to change the statute. It stalled in the Senate, and for good reason, because it's a bad idea to have those lumped together, especially at this stage where we have a campus that is deserving of recognition in the budget process.
Okay, thank you. The next one is addressed to all legislators, and this is going to be a combination of about 3 or 4 questions, all kind of education related. We have a little overlap and redundancy, but let me start here. The first big part is the block grant. Do you believe the block grant school funding bill is in compliance with the court's order requiring equal funding and more funding for K through 12? Do you have any interest in following the court's order? And then finally, on school funding, why does Kansas need 293 school districts? To reduce the budget, why not reduce to 105 school districts? That would reduce high administrative personnel costs, thereby allowing more funding spent on the classroom. With current budget issues, it is not the time to visit consolidation issues. And so with that, with all of those questions, I'm sorry as we're trying to get through these, I would open it up to whoever wants to start us off.
Well, I find those questions to be very interesting and relevant. We have worked on Gannon for a number of years, and they came up with a ruling to the legislature, and basically the one paragraph I was very interested in, about page 90-something, said funding is not the issue. It's really outcomes, and they demanded that we look at the Rose standards and outcomes of what the dollars we're spending in our schools to measure. So I agree with that. I think outcomes are extremely relative. We're having employers wanting people come work for them that are able to read, write, do math, everything that an employee you'd expect them to do. And I think if you saw what happened when we passed Senate Bill 155 for technical education, we started out with a part of the bill that paid for the tuition at the technical schools, and then we had a spiff that went back to each school district if that student finished their certificate by December 31st of the year that they graduated. I will tell you that all the funds were expended 100% that first year, and we added several million more dollars the next year because of the popularity of the program. And I will tell you that 95% of those students that got their certificate pretty much had a job before they graduated. In fact, it was a problem in the welding area. They'd come hire them when they got technically competent before they finished the program. So the elementary school, or not the school district did not get that $1,000 coming back to them because they were hired for a $60,000 a year job. I mean, that's a living wage. So we had some complaints from school districts about them not finishing that, so they couldn't get their dollars. So we're looking at changing that a little bit. So there's a program that has bottom line application where we have a living wage for those young men and women that want to take the time to earn that technical certificate. In terms of the lower court order of the extra dollars, absolutely sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. They're telling us how to legislate the education budget before we even proposed it. And I think it's a little difficult for us to do that. Now, if they would like to come over and to our committee hearings and provide testimony so we can look at what data they're using to make that decision, maybe I'd take some of that into account. But at this point in time, I don't think I have a clue, not a clue, how our funding formula works today. And there's very few people in the Senate or the House, and there's a couple people over at the Department of Education that actually understand how our current funding formula works. Personally, I've been working on it for about 8 years. I have spent hours with Dale Dennis, who's the budget director, reviewing how this thing works. And we still have ongoing discussions on application to very specific things in different school districts. So because it is that difficult, I don't think there are very many school boards or superintendents that realize all the things that are available to them. And I'll put this out as he who knows the rules wins. Well, we have given license to our superintendents to use the weightings that we've given them to provide their school district with the funding. So we start with the base state aid, they put it through the weightings, and we come up with a dollar figure. Those who know the rules well get more money. Those who don't. Is that fair? Not really. But that's where we are today. And really, congratulations to the superintendents that have done due diligence, that know how to work the system and get extra dollars for their schools. I don't blame them at all. We've given permission to do that. Now, in terms of the other thing, in terms of 293 school districts, it's actually 286. You should be glad we don't have the 2,800 and something that we used to have. One thing that happened during the court case with Montoy, we paid for a very expensive research, Ogden Blickenmeyer, very expensive long term. And it was unfortunate that the courts chose to cherry pick that report because in there they said we should have school districts that are in size of 10,000 pupils per student. At that time, that would have given us about 48 school districts, 10,000 apiece. And I do think we have small school districts by choice. If we look at some counties that have 6 or 7 school districts, we look at the square miles that are there, we look at the number of students or pupils that are in that county. We have counties in western Kansas that have the same number of pupils, about the same number of square miles, and 1 school district. That's ridiculous. We have taken some very excellent steps toward this consolidation model, and I'm not talking about closing schools. I'm talking about administrative consolidation with our service centers. We have an excellent one here in Salina, Smoky Hill. We have a very good one in Hutchinson, SDAC. We have out one in western Kansas called Greenbush. And they do provide services for multiple school districts, and we actually have colleges that participate in those. And they provide the ability to purchase contracts or paper or janitorial supplies. That's very good use of our state dollars. I congratulate them for doing that. But I think we could go further. I know that at SDAC, we have 10 or 12 school districts that really can't afford to have an HR person or a payroll person. So that service center is providing that payroll service for those school districts. They are providing that HR person for that school district. Well, if we can do it for those, we could probably do it for most. And I think that's probably a model that we need to look into a little more. So I would like to look at administrative consolidation. Having grown up in a rural community and bused to my schools, it was a consolidated school district. I rode the bus 17 miles to the junior high school. I think that was a very good model. I think it was saving, and we had one administrator for our whole county. And it was a very large county in Colorado Springs. So I do think those are good discussion points. Love to talk to you afterwards to see what you'd like to do and what you'd like to propose. Thank you.
I only got some of the questions written down in time, but as far as the block grant's compliance with the court order, you know, I've read the court order a couple of times, and I believe that it can be in compliance as far as following the court order. If there is a court order, that will happen when it reaches the Supreme Court. We haven't even had the 3-judge panel make a more than just a passing comment on the block grant and its implementation. So I would wait until we receive some direction from the Supreme Court on achieving outcomes. And as Senator Arpke said, that's the standard that we're looking for, is how do we achieve this outcome? And that doesn't necessarily have to do only with dollars spent. As far as the school districts being moved down to 105 districts, I don't have a problem with consolidation, but I do think that's a local control type issue where, while it should be encouraged in some cases, it may not be appropriate in all. We do have different constituencies, and of course some people just have no problem paying for that additional layer of government that they're paying for. So you know, if you want that amount of local control, local board in that area, that sort of thing, then that's something that's going to be paid for. As far as consolidation, I think we have achieved some, well, I mean, obviously a lot of consolidation over time, but even just in the past decade or so, we've consolidated several districts. But I think that overall, as far as achieving outcomes, that's the important thing to note here, is that we do want to be in compliance with what the court recommends as far as achieving those outcomes, and probably focus a little less on just what the 3-judge panel continues to think is simply a dollar figure issue. I think the Supreme Court is a little more reasonable in that regard, and will end up being more reasonable. Block grant, is it in compliance with the court order? Where you follow it? And then
Okay.
what about consolidating?
Okay. One of the questions that came to my mind when I first saw, excuse me, the block grant, how is this going to be affected by the Gannon lawsuit? To me and to some of my colleagues, it was actually a way to divert attention away from those lawsuits, and they still are out there, which was very obvious when we had this panel all within a couple of hours already stating that they're going to question it. I think as far as how it is being handled, it's already been pretty well covered. I'd like to go down to the question about changing from 286 to 105. Realistically, I think a lot of times people forget that there is something west of Salina. We deal a lot with Johnson County. A lot of the bills, it's always talking about the upper, more populated areas. And we have a lot of rural communities out there that the school district is the heart of their community. And when you're talking about administrative consolidations, I have fears that it would also move on to school consolidations. And when you have a school leave a community, it's almost like a death blow to some of them. And not even talking about transportation costs, who, you know, all of the schools in one certain school district. I know we have a superintendent sitting in the audience here that gives me direction, and I take a little exception when a comment was made about the superintendents, I really fully believe that the superintendents in all of our districts are doing a tremendous job, have their thumb on the heartbeat of the community, and knows exactly what's happening in their district. Monetarily, if we had, you also have to remember that we have a block grant and we have a budget, but do we have the funds? Where are the funds coming from? Are there going to be adequate funds for that? So before you start making all these changes and thoughts, you also have to remember that we're going to have to fund. Now, I know the question was directed that if we were to cut back in the number of school districts, that might be a cost savings. Actually, I don't really feel that it would. Administratively, perhaps, but those administrators have a lot of area. It was alluded that one of our representatives had to be on a bus 17 miles. Well, if you're in a windstorm in Kansas, you don't want to be in a bus for 17 miles. Trust me. We need to look. Thanks, guys. You need to look at the full picture, and I can see where this is going, and trust me, it's not going to be a pretty picture. So I will close at that. Thank you.
This gets to the heart of a critical discussion, and the reality is there's not an answer at this time. 4 years ago, I would have told you, we can get to an answer. I'm not sure. The concern that I had, are we in compliance? I can find many attorneys who will be glad to tell me we are not in compliance, and will help to support that argument. Can probably find a few that will tell us we are. I believe the legislature in its majority voted for this, saying that it is in compliance. I think that was part of an assumption that they would have made to, in good faith, think that we can get there. We don't have that answer. The next question is, do we want an answer? Because I might have an answer, but we've got to come to the we answer. And as I look at this one, I remember this issue being when my aunts and uncles were on the school board, and now my cousins are on the school board, and it has been there. And I remember Montoy before Gannon, and you remember all of those things. And how do we get to something that we agree on? In an ideal world, the block grant can be a perfect way for us to have a discussion to say, you know, we are committed to this. And it's 48 or 105 or 200 school districts, and I have no idea what the right answer is, but I'll say it may not be 286. I was fortunate that the Southeast District happened to consolidate when it did, and I think I got a better education from Southeast than I would have gotten at Assaria a few years earlier. But I know that was not an easy decision. I think in that case it was better. I think if I happened to be in a different case, I could show you where it was worse. I don't happen to have one of those, but it probably exists. But this is the really tough one. One of the better arguments for the block grants and the process is to say, how do we get out of this mess of wasting resources, of disagreeing on what it is? It would be great to get there. I certainly would want to be a productive part of that process to get there, but I'm not entirely sure what it takes. So consolidation, I think, is a part of that, but I think it is a question which gets right to that. And one part of the answer is being willing to listen to an answer that doesn't agree with mine, if that makes sense. Whether I'm in the legislature telling you need less funding, or you're somewhere telling me I need more, where is that middle ground? And it's not easily defined. I'm not sure it can be defined in the courts. The reality is it probably won't be defined for us, but it'd be wonderful if we can go through a process and say, you know what? We can live with this as a suitable education. And in addition to that, here's the provisions we have locally if we want to go above suitable to something that's more ideal. And golly, each of us will have different interpretations of what that is. But I appreciate the question, and I'll let my idealistic side come out for a moment, that I'd love to get to imagine together a place that's better than having to have that continual dissonance between where we want to wind up. So thanks, and let's keep asking the question and listening to each other's answers.
All right, thank you. I know we've still got some questions left, but we are coming on 10 o'clock. I apologize if I was unable to ask your specific question. But with that, why don't we move to closing remarks? I would ask, given the time up on the clock, that we limit those to no more than 2 minutes. And why don't we start with Senator Arpke?
Again, thank you for coming this morning. Lots of ideas out there, lots of discussion. Just a little history. In 1991, we had $848 million in SGF. Total spending for schools was $1.1 billion. SGF for 17 is going to be $3.56 billion. Our total spend for K through 12 will be $6.1 billion. It is 53% of our budget. Total education spending is going to be 65% of our budget. I do agree it's a very important part of our budget, but I'd ask you to think, if we're going to spend those kinds of dollars, what kinds of outcomes are you expecting from our schools? So appreciate your input on that. Thank you to AT&T and the Chamber. Frank, thank you for moderating.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Clays.
Well, thanks for being here today. Thank you to the Chamber, AT&T, to our friends in the media who are covering this today, and of course to Salina Access TV. Just really appreciate all the input. If you have any questions or concerns that weren't addressed here today, feel free to shoot an email over to us or call. Definitely in the office until the wee hours of the evening, and happy to answer any questions that you have or address any concerns that you have. Thanks again for being here.
All right, thank you. Representative Diana Dirks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks to everyone who is here and sponsors Chamber and AT&T. Again, this is what it's all about. These town hall meetings, as I reference them as, is just something that gives us an opportunity to hear directly from you, and the questions were wonderful. I hope that we gave you some insight as to some of the answers. We don't know everything, trust me, but I will continue in my efforts on the Education Committee. It's a heartfelt endeavor for me. I put a lot of time and hours into it, and hopefully some of the decisions you'll be in agree with. I know we won't always agree on everything, but please, the main thing for me is that constant communication with my constituents. I listen to you. That was in part is on some of my decisions and votes on the floor, and that to me is critical, that we keep in constant contact. So feel free to email me, give me a call at any time, and thank you once again for being here.
Thank you. And finally, we have Representative Stephen Johnson.
Thank you, and thanks to my colleagues and sponsors as well as all of you. I said too much in my last statement, but that comes down to kind of the center of it, as Representative Dirks just said. Your help is really critical, and I appreciate what I have gotten and will continue to need. As we talked about the education discussion, that is key. On Senate Bill 7, when we were on the floor, I had a group that I was texting on each of the issues. That was, and I messed up. I put Keith Blake rather than Lori Blake's cell phone number, for those of you that know my friends at Asaria. And I dropped off a vehicle for an oil change actually this morning. And Keith said, well, at one point I was 54 texts behind. And, and I no doubt totally jammed up his phone for the morning. But that input really was critical as we went through what is going on and what is that impact, because what's in compliance, what meets it, what are the issues are hard to grapple with, and I appreciate that. And as I mentioned, that issue, the tax issue, please continue to stay engaged. It is your engagement that will have a huge driver on these policies, and we've got a couple of things where we really need it. So thank you for being here, and thanks to the Chamber.
All right, thank you. Well, with that, I'd just like to remind everybody that the next legislative meeting has been moved from May 23 to May 16. Same time, same location. And I want to thank once again the legislators, and the public for attending. Thanks to Salina Access TV. Thanks for the media for being here. Please keep in touch with your legislators. And thank you again to AT&T for sponsoring this meeting, and we are adjourned.